Well, hello, ladies and gentlemen. Here we are. We're back at the Tech Town Square. James Azar is back with us this week. We've got an amazing show for you. This week, we're going to be talking about how nation states are arming terror groups. It's going to be a hot dialogue. We're going to take it wherever you, the audience, our valued audience, we are here for you, want to take it. Let's do our little disclaimer and get that out of the way. All opinions, comments by the hosts are our own and not representative of any corporation or other entity or organization out there. And James, let's go, man. Give us a wonderful opening thought.
Well, hello, everyone. It's so good to be back. I'm so excited. I've been planning the show for like 2 weeks in my head, right? And the news has just been getting more and more into this kind of stuff. So tonight we're going to be talking about a few different things, but really mainly we're talking about nation states sponsoring cyber training, cyber espionage, and cyber training to terrorist organizations. We're seeing this become a significant trend. It's been really talked about a lot lately. It's something that we're going to talk about today. And where does the role of all of that come in? It's going to be very significant because we look at nation states and we understand that there's going to be some need for change. But what happens when a terror group launches a cyber attack because they don't have the same means of loss as, say, for example, a nation state? So specifically what we're seeing this time is Iran and the Al-Quds force in Iran is training Hezbollah with cyber threat training, essentially to become a active APT and cyber unit. And they've got a plan of how they want to utilize Hezbollah's new cyber capabilities as part of the group. And Hezbollah is a world-renowned terror group.
Now, James, this is going to be an incredible dialogue, and I want to get really into the details, but there's something I've got to ask you, man. What's in the background of your
Yeah. All right, guys. So a few weeks ago, if you don't remember, John De La Cruz, Paul Cumming, I think a bunch of guys all here said, James, we want you to get rid of your iconic black T-shirt and wear paisley. And today, Eddie's not wearing paisley today, but typically he wears a paisley shirt. So John De La Cruz was nice enough to send me, I'll move away, this beautiful paisley shirt, and we're raising money for the Wounded Warrior Project. We have a goal. So I put a very ambitious goal. $5,000. I'll probably do like a bunch of campaigns where I'll match donations and all that good stuff. Wounded Warrior Project has been amazing. It's one of the best organizations out there. It supports wounded veterans, gets them into recovery, rehab, helps them if they've lost an arm or a leg with implants and all this stuff that they need prosthetics, in order to have a actual means and quality of life. It also helps them in terms of recovering from their injuries, PTSD. Wounded Warrior Project saved so many of the people I've worked with and who are my brothers in arms, that when I think of a cause where I would wear something as loud and Eddie as that shirt is, because Eddie actually commented this week when I showed him the shirt. I was like, first Paisley came and he's like, dude, that's a really nice shirt. I'd actually wear that shirt.
Okay, we needed to adjust the rules here. We're trying to get him into an ugly shirt, ladies and gentlemen. Let's just bear that on in mind, okay?
The link is in the comments. I'll add it right now to the LinkedIn stuff while we bring up some of your comments here, by the way. And this is the unfortunately, this is one of the downsides of doing this here. Is folks, you might have an echo here in just a second. Hang on, let me see if I can throw this without and see if it pops up. It should be in the comments now. There it is. You've got it. Dave is here. Matt is here. I'm
not seeing anything in the comments on my side, and I'm also streaming on my phone, so I don't see it. While James is just clicking around to look at that, I want to say thank you, because 2 people have already made donations to this fantastic.
Yeah, we're at $90. So let's say, first of all, let's welcome everyone who's with us tonight. We got a big group. So Hamdi, hey, how's it going, buddy? Jonathan, good evening to you as well. Miguel, what's up, Miguel? Nora's with us as well. Hey, James and Eddie, tuning in from lovely Charlotte, North Carolina. Love it. The awesome Matt Lee is here. I love Matt's profile picture.
It's awesome.
Right? I love the beard, man. The beard does it. The magnificent Mustang Sally. So one of my first, in my first few months of doing CISO Talk, I had Sally on the podcast, and it was unbelievable. We did a Christmas show. You got to go back and look up my podcast with Sally. One of the smartest people I know, man. She's unbelievable. Miguel was going to ask. The shirt's right behind. James likes the goal, and he wants to take the money. So please go donate to Tiltify. I don't touch the money, by the way. The money never gets to me. The money goes directly to Wounded Warrior through Tiltify. Wounded Warrior is supporting this. They're actually going to try and come up with the worst shirt they can find or have Under Armour make me something absolutely disgusting as part of this if we hit our goal. So Matt says mine as well. He's got 100. Thank you, Matt.
Thank you, Matt.
Thank
Good
you.
man.
Thank you.
So appreciate it.
There's the link right there, folks. You guys can all see it. David Vaughn. We're going to need Dave today. So, Dave, don't go anywhere. We're going to be talking about stuff, and you're going to have a lot to say. The awesome Kim is on, and I'll be keynoting tomorrow her event. So, if you guys have not signed up for it, please, please, please go sign up. It's going to be awesome. Danielle.
Oh, Danielle.
Howdy, Danielle.
Good to see you.
David Vaughn, absolutely, buddy. You did inspire this, man. Matt Lee and Miguel are now chatting in the chat. James has already donated.
Sweet.
Get
Thanks,
Edwin
James.
a Unit 42 shirt. That is a brilliant idea by David Vaughn. That is so brilliant. And James McQuiggan is daring Vaughn to donate more money than him. We're at $290 right now. We just got $200, so thank you guys so much.
Thank you so much. That's amazing.
Once we hit $1,000, if we hit $1,000 tonight, next week, I'll be wearing that shirt on the show.
Beautiful. Right.
I'll be wearing that shirt on the show. So let's talk a little bit about this. So let's get into our topic because it's a really important one. So Iran's Al-Quds Force, which is a very, 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 very It's a terror organization. It's been recognized by the previous administration as being a terror organization in a regime that oppresses its people in Iran. They operate kind of like the CIA slash Mossad slash, MI5, MI6 type of activity. And they're now training Hezbollah and building Hezbollah's cyber capabilities in order to start addressing and using them as a significant proxy in the cyber warfare that they plan on engaging, whether it be against Lebanon itself. So Lebanon's in the midst of something very significant. Part of their cyber capabilities are really around the idea that there's a lot of Lebanese that cooperate with Israel and with the US, and they're trying to sniff those people out with their cyber capabilities. Because, let's be real. Israel and the U.S. launch covert operations against Iran and Syria, and they nail them every single time. So there's some significance to this. And comes now the idea of diplomacy. Is cyber diplomacy even possible in a realm like this? When we see nation states arming terror groups with weapons, we rarely do anything about it. But now cyberspace, an organization like Hezbollah would have no problem shutting off all of the capabilities, the electrical grid in, let's say, the Northeast as part of a terror attack and defacing a bunch of websites and saying, Allahu Akbar, here we go, we've taken you guys down, decrying the name of God while they do what they do. So David talks about China's been doing this in South America. You could just buy the country. So David talks about China's been doing that in South America for years. Yes, they have been. You could just buy the country looking at China, Africa. Yeah. They're doing that with predatory loans, but, this is a significant threat for a lot of not only cybersecurity nation state, not only for our countries, but also for organizations, because they can literally use Hezbollah for a bunch of different, activities that would be like, well, what are you going to do? Bomb Lebanon?
Right.
So what are some of your thoughts, Eddie?
Well, so we started looking at this about 3 or 4 years ago. I noticed a bit of a trend, and the trend was this: cybercrime syndicates of organized crime groups. And so this dovetails into the issue we're talking about today, because now, if you start to think of old school mafia organized crime type organizations, we started to see a collection, our researchers, of organizations around the world that are essentially sourcing the best talents they can on the dark web, on the deep web, right, for engaging in a criminal enterprise activity. Now, there's an interesting advantage they have, and hear me out in a moment, and we'll pull this right back into how nation states are able to take advantage of these skill sets. And so imagine old school mafia types. So I live in New Jersey. New Jersey's got quite the history to it. And if you wanted to create a mafia type family, it was kind of around here. And maybe you fought with the mafia family in Manhattan, and there were different skill sets among them. And this was insane crime upon which we are still reeling from today. Here's an example. I've been in New Jersey 5 years. You're still not allowed to pump your gas here. It's a racket. Right? It's actually literally from the old racket. You can't pump your gas here. This is something where the pressure from organized crime that came through politics, they were around for decades, from the 1920s, Prohibition created this massive empire for them and gave them all of this kind of power. Well, today, with cybercrime, we see a lot of these cybercrime activities coming out of Eastern Europe. It's just where a lot of the traffic is for cyber criminal activity, not nation state, right? Well, they're able to recruit, we call them kingpins, from their resources and assets and skill sets from around the world. And we started to see, hey, somebody has a skill set for writing a piece of code in Australia. We'll use them. So imagine now a mafia type family, the Godfather type family, all the power they had back in those days, being able to touch anyone in the world, being able to recruit any type of skill set or asset into their team, and having the anonymity of the deep dark web. Okay, this skill set has improved so much that these people now, and we've certainly seen this with in the former USSR countries, and so from Russia, being able to use these criminal organizations to engage in nefarious activity. We know this because the countries whereupon they reside are providing, I wouldn't say legal immunity to them, but they're really not doing anything about it. Right? It's fairly blatant within the countries that they're in, especially Russia. So now I'm starting to wonder, how does North Korea, Iran, some of these other rogue nations, in addition to the skill sets they've got, and China's got a great skill set in and of their own, but perhaps North Korea, perhaps Iran is using these kind of criminal organizations because they need a piece of code, because they need entry or a piece of ransomware code that was effective in the past, or maybe they need a 0 day, right? So they come to these guys to look for that kind of stuff. We saw this a little while back, and I haven't looked for a couple of years. There were public-facing websites. Zerodium.com was one of them. ExpoCOD was another one. I haven't looked for a couple of years, but they published a public price sheet for vulnerabilities. So these were organizations, cyber criminal syndicates, I like to call them, who were basically saying, hey, and at the time it was $60,000 if you could give them a bypassing technology for Microsoft Excel sandboxing. So if you found a piece of code that would do that, keep your mouth shut. If you found a bug or a vulnerability, sell it to them for $60,000. An iOS vulnerability, that was going for $2 million back in the day. Public-facing websites these were. And with the advent of Bitcoin, of course, these guys have just gone to the wind. So I'd like to address a question, and we'll get to some comments right now. How much, I wonder, do these organizations now engage with, I'll call them rogue nation states, but Iran, North Korea, so that these people can team up and essentially get the advantage of other people around the world and fingers on the keyboard as opposed to boots on the ground? So,
right. We're seeing that be a thing. So Matt here brings up something that I think is actually very true. And I don't want to draw distinctions between events, but I think what Matt says here is, you joke, but I bet a real kinetic war starts in one of these types of cyber escalations that kills a person in a factory somewhere, and it's boom, World War III.
Right.
I think it's going to take a little bit more than killing a person in a factory somewhere. It could be, blowing up an electric facility, or causing a meltdown at a nuclear facility, or taking out an entire hospital, which could lead to people dying, because that's when people are going to that's when the population is going to demand a warfare response to a kinetic cyber type of escalation, right? We got dragged into Afghanistan because of 9/11, right? And that was 3,000 people. We went into Iraq for WMDs.
The potential of death in that case. Yeah.
Right. So we talk about this, but and there's some really good comments here, and we'll get to those here in just a minute. But yeah, I mean, mass hysteria is another one here, and David brings this up, and it's so true. But creating mass hysteria, and we're seeing this, by the way, with COVID. I mean, COVID's the ultimate kind of like test tube to what happens when you unleash something into a population and you kind of let it power through, right? So, I got my first vaccine today, right? So I'm not an anti-vaxxer. So when I say, or I don't believe that COVID isn't real, COVID's real. I've had COVID twice. All those things could be true, but COVID was kind of like a very, very, very really cool test tube of how do you create mass hysteria in a population, and you're creating a bunch of mistrust and distrust that eventually leads to this kind of stuff. So Dave here says organized crime MO is different than organized terror groups. One cares about making money. The other just wants to progress their own ideology. They also want to reach their recruiting goals. So, I mean, Dave, you're right kind of in a way, but here's where I would fight back is terror groups. So when Hamas runs out of money in Gaza, what do? They don't do a fundraiser, right? They don't do a telethon and bring all these great comedians, right? They go out and they launch a bunch of missiles towards Israel. Israel responds, and then they say, look, we're under attack by Israel. How in the world can, anyone, we need help, we need money, we need all these things.
And I'll give it a domestic example of it. Look how the CIA worked with mafia in the 1950s and 60s in relation to Cuba, right? So that's kind of what I'm getting at there. I'm wondering how these nation states like Iran, like Hamas, are going to engage cybercrime groups because it's useful for them. And the cybercrime group just gets money. Yeah, you're right. They want money. That's their motivation.
Right. The money for a terror group is a way to get more people in, because terror groups at the end of the day, they're not like mafias, right? They're literally, if you understand what terror groups are, like Hezbollah, like Hamas, like Al-Qaeda, like the Taliban, and if you look at what they've done, specifically the Taliban, because we have the history with the Taliban. So the Taliban was a terror group. We partially supported the Taliban, right? A little bit, a tiny bit. We armed them, right, to fight the Russians, right? Yeah. And they were just a terror group.
That's right. Yeah.
And then they became but they weren't really trying to force an ideology. Afghanistan pre-Taliban was a very secular nation. Then they came into power. So terror groups are all about power. So what happens when you give a terror group like Hezbollah or Hamas or Al-Qaeda or ISIS, right? We talk about nation state APTs, but in the Middle East, it's a different ball games, right? China and Russia have their own APTs, and they use cyber crime and they use organized crime and cyber gangs as kind of like a way to launch some of their attacks. But Iran is going to terror groups and saying, you can't do suicide bombings anymore. The intel is too good. So you know what you should start doing? Taking down power grids, invading emails, doing business email compromise, getting funded, because Iran, thanks to President Trump's actions, Iran's broke. It can't finance Hezbollah. So the only thing they can give Hezbollah now is knowledge. It's training. Yeah, and Hezbollah to use that knowledge and that training to finance its illicit activities.
So wasn't North Korea was responsible for WannaCry, right? Which infected something like
allegedly.
Allegedly 200,000. What were the numbers again? I think it raked in something like $100 million. I'm gonna fact check myself when James is talking in just a moment on that one. But yeah, exactly, a lucrative business for them. And here's what's interesting about North Korea. So North Korea, as some of you might know, when you run a dictatorship like that in a communist state, you have to have a communist commissioner, a rat, on every single street. How do you reward those rats? You reward them with something, a new washer dryer, something else. Do you know North Korea is the world's second largest purchaser of cognac? And so they need money to keep these rats moving so that they can rat out their neighbors for not worshipping the dear leader, for example. Now, I'm going to check how much they got from WannaCry, because I remember reading the stat a little while ago, but it's definitely in the tens of millions. I think it was in the hundreds of millions.
So a few things. Let's get to some comments here, and then we're going to get back into this. So Matt talks about they did it with Cialis and the old ZeusNet. That was in Russia. That's a fair point when it comes to I think David Vaughn. Matt Lee talks about a massive amount of or mass hysteria, as David Vaughn brought up mass hysteria. Matt Lee talks about COVID as a massive global forced experiment. We don't know what all experiments, new cyber attacks, massive dwell time in a supply chain. Just wait. David talks about how do you collect DNA from all the people, COVID vaccines,
So the damage was in the billions for WannaCry. That's the damage. As far as what the ransom was, it's a little tougher for people to estimate, but they're saying in the millions. Okay.
Well, just think of Maersk. Maersk, which was a victim of WannaCry, the large shipping company. Right. They lost 4.8 billion in their, value in their market cap.
But how much did North Korea make? That's what I'm trying to get at there.
About $2 billion.
Really? Probably. Yeah.
About $2 billion is what they made.
So it's lucrative for these guys, obviously.
Well, for North Korea it is, and same thing for Iran. The only difference with Iran is every time they launch a cyber attack trying to get some money, we shut down their power grid. We shut down their port, right? Yeah. So now they're just like, well, we can do this with Hezbollah. Hezbollah has destroyed the beautiful country of Lebanon. They've completely destroyed it. So what would happen, on something like that? What would happen once they have cyber capabilities? There's a very interesting thing in the Jerusalem Post about this, and I want to kind of read this. So a cyber terrorism expert says that Hezbollah's education, which rakes in big bucks for the organization, is second to none. It's imported from Iran. It's been fine-tuned for over 2 decades. This education includes how Hezbollah sets up a course on how to do this. This was before the term fake news was ever used and before the use of bots as a means to influence and change the perception. They were doing this in Lebanon. Look at the hoax in 2006 when Hezbollah released photographs perpetrating to show an Israeli missile strike on a Red Cross ambulance. Major media outlets around the globe ran with it, according to Landau. But the photos and the stories behind it didn't hold up to the scrutiny. Hezbollah has now adapted to today's technology. It's more about how changing people's perceptions through social media. So a lot of this has to do with the idea of fueling also that Hezbollah is not a terror group. It's not someone who you should look at as a threat. They're looking at disinformation. Hezbollah has lost, after the explosion, the horrible explosion last year at the port in Beirut that killed over 300 people and injured thousands of others. Hezbollah has a really bad PR problem in Lebanon, and now they're trying to use cybersecurity as a way to influence that. And I think that's significant because they're not just going to use it internally. They're now going to channel that, and they're going to start targeting foreign nationals. They're going to start targeting multinational corporations that maybe operate within Lebanon by launching cyber strikes and then sending one of their Toyota four-door SUVs to go pick up a bucket of cash and bring it back.
Yeah. And where I thought you were also going with that is it's interesting. All these click farms, you see this in Saudi Arabia, right? Massive armies of people clicking to make the Saudi royal family look beautiful, look amazing, to cover up the atrocities of that family. And you would think that Hezbollah would have the same motivation across the Middle East and across the people that would support them if they didn't commit such and such an atrocity. Well, human beings are being used in these click farms to beat down real news in, let's say, Twitter by simply entering fake Twitter stories about Hezbollah, about the Saudi family, in this case, in the real world, so that they can influence news, right? Hezbollah isn't even in my top 5 of cyber concerns. Really? Why?
So David, that's great. Tell us why. Because Hezbollah is an up and rising organization. I know a lot of people don't pay a lot of attention to Hezbollah because they're not on the world stage, but Hezbollah now has immersed over 200,000 missiles. They trained by the Al-Quds force. They're now battle tested because they supported Bashar al-Assad in Syria. Right, so they've warfare that fought along the Iranian troops in quieting down the uprising in Syria. So they're battle tested. They've got missiles. They're funded. They've got a political wing. They've got a propaganda wing, and now they're getting a cyber wing. If they're not a threat, then who is?
Interesting comments, though. David's saying they suck, as in they're incapable, is I think what you mean by that.
But they're getting the tools, David. What we're trying to talk about here is we're not saying they're a threat today. What we're saying is there's a nation state like Iran, and Iran is now training these people to get cyber capabilities. And they're training them to get cyber capabilities because my beautiful, lovely wife here is watching and commenting, and she says Hezbollah's in bankruptcy. And you're absolutely right, sweetheart. They are in bankruptcy, and that's why they need cyber. Because once they start to launch cyber campaigns where they're able to execute ransomware attacks and business email compromise, they're no longer bankrupt. David says they're a bit late to the game. Maybe, but they're a bit late to the game, but they're very, very well organized. And I think that's one thing we can't underestimate. See, we thought the same about Al-Qaeda pre 9/11, right? That they were kind of just quiet. They're in Afghanistan. They're in the Middle East. They do what they do in Yemen, in Afghanistan, in Pakistan. But they weren't really going to expand beyond that region until 9/11 happened. So what are we waiting for Hezbollah? Because I believe in, quote this now, 28 minutes into today's show, Hezbollah is going to be the greatest cyber threat into terror groups across the globe over the next 5 to 10 years.
It would make sense that as a proxy for Iran, like if I'm running Iran, it would be very helpful for me. And Hezbollah, since they're bankrupt, since they are, let's say, underestimated, they almost have nothing to lose. Iran's got a lot to lose. I think a lot more to lose than Hezbollah does. Wouldn't you think? And for that reason, I think they might be more, let's say, blatant in their targets. I mean, put it this way. If Iran really let's say Iran has the capability, and look, in 2013, this is a lot, 10 years ago, they successfully attacked the Bowman Avenue Dam just 19 miles north of Manhattan. That was in retaliation for Stuxnet, right? So they managed to pull it together. Stuxnet was 2005, roughly. So it took them, almost a decade to pull it together. But they did successfully do that. Now, the only reason they didn't cause a flood that day is because the sluice gate had been dismantled for repair. Seriously, that's why they didn't cause a flood. Also, we think that they were trying to attack the Bowman Avenue Dam that is closer to Chicago, a big dam. The one north of Manhattan is a tiny little dam, so it wouldn't have caused much problem anyway, even if the sluice gate was installed correctly. But think about this: if they have capability to do that, then they likely have capability to do something more serious. If they did, we would really hurt them. But a proxy war through Hezbollah have probably got the balls to do it, because what would our retaliation be? That's an interesting question.
So yeah, I mean, the retaliation would be in another war in the Middle East, this time in Lebanon. But I think strategically, if you look at what Iran's trying to do here, is Iran's broke. Hezbollah's also broke. Both of those things are absolutely true. And by the way, Dave here says their good organization will make for easy attribution. He didn't mean east attribution. He meant easy attribution. Probably, but here's the deal. When you look at what Iran's trying to do right now, so Iran is, thanks to President Trump's diplomacy, Iran's been weakened, right? And Iran's been put in a place where they're broke, they're isolated, they can't even sell oil without it being, busted up in the middle of the sea, right? And those ships being brought to port and not allowed to sail through because of the embargoes that are on Iran. So you're looking at this in a way where Iran is now negotiating with the Biden White House, with the Biden administration, about possibly re-entering the JCPOA, the Iran nuclear deal, aka known as the Iran nuclear deal. So they need to be good actors now, because the Biden administration can't sign a deal with an Iran that's an active threat. But Iran still needs money, and Iran still has goals. And with the peace between Israel and the Emirates and Bahrain and Morocco and Sudan, right? The Abraham Accords that President Trump did at the last year in office have really kind of changed the balance of power in the Middle East. And there's really warm relations now between Israel and Saudi. All the flights that fly from Israel to the Emirates fly over Saudi airspace. So this stuff is very there's a ton of progress that's being made here. And so this is significant because they can use Hezbollah as a way to continue to do their cyber activities while they're negotiating and getting more money. So this is the other thing to look at here. We'll get to some comments. Corinne says Hezbollah has no cyber skills. They're good at fighting in this field, but they don't know how to click enter. Well, they've had some successful cyber attacks, Hezbollah has. Matt's laughing at that. Again, I've posted the link to the Paisley shirt challenge. We're at $390.
Thank you
to everyone who's donated. Thank
Very
you.
sweet of you. That's amazing. What a great audience.
Thank you, Matt Lee, for your donation, guys. I'm really, really grateful. David wishes Corinne David misses Corinne and says happy belated birthday. We're going to let your love affair continue in the comment section. And Danielle says happy 20th birthday. It is her 20th birthday. And so we've got a comment here from YouTube. Don't forget that Hezbollah was responsible for the Marine barracks attack in Lebanon in 1983 that killed over 200 Marines. That is very, very true, Shlomo Buckman. That is absolutely true. The legendary Shlomo Buckman. This guy's fought in more wars than I can count on my fingers. But yeah, I mean, Hezbollah did bomb the Marine barracks in the I think it was 1983. Vaughn, quote me if I'm wrong here. But I believe it was 1983, and they killed over 200 Marines. So yeah, there's something very true to say about this. Where do you take it from here, Eddie? What do you think?
Well, I tell you, here's what I think. I think that the challenge we're going to have in the United States and in the Western world is communicating the importance of this message to the general public, so that we can get enough pressure on our current administration to do the right thing. That's what I think. I mean, look at the experts and the generous people that are on this call. It's incredibly complicated to get this kind of messaging down through the pipe, as it were. I mean, this is why we put the Tech Town Square together, right, James? Is to be able to try and have a dialogue with the general public about matters of extreme importance, because all you're really seeing is lovey-dovey news, right? I mean, this kind of conversation isn't happening in mainstream media. So what I'm wondering now is, how do we start to bring this conversation to a place where we can not backtrack on any of the progress that's been done in the last 4 years or so, with putting pressure on regimes, so that we can really try and collapse the evil kind of ownership of the regime, and allow the people to start taking over a country so that they can actually have more freedoms. And I don't know that that's going to happen anytime soon. So this is going to continue for quite some time. Let's just keep having the conversation, and lots more happy birthdays. I'm here so you don't get fined. I'm just here so you don't get fined. Is that another one of David's comments? I'm not sure.
Yeah, I'm just here so I don't get fined. He's just kidding.
Okay.
So Danielle says something very good. When did we become the world police? So we became the world police when we defeated the Japanese and the Germans in World War II.
Right.
And we didn't become world police because we signed up for the job. We got dragged into the job when the Japanese attacked Pearl Harbor in December of 1941, dragging us into World War II. And so that's really when we stepped into the world stage. That's really where we started fighting. But America has been a power of good in the world.
Now, this is a great question, and it brings up the whole debate about what we do with our borders. Do we pull our troops back and strengthen our borders, or do we continue pushing up that, let's say, force of good? And this is what I mean about the conversation is not accurate in the media today, because that force of good, the pride that it is to be an American, me as a guest to this beautiful nation, I think I'm often the most patriotic when I'm hanging around my colleagues, hanging around my friends, because I've lived and seen the difference maybe, or I've chosen my citizenship as American, right? But this is no longer a badge of honor, it seems. And so let's have that conversation. Should we be bringing back our defenses so that we no longer, let's say, engage in these kinds of policies? I think that, or engage in this kind of, let's say, cyber warfare, I think up until very recently, that was absolutely possible. I think now, with the internet, with cybercrime, the weaponization of the internet, it's actually no longer possible, because there are no borders in cybersecurity. I'm all for physical borders. I'm all for pulling troops and making sure that we strengthen our home. But in cyber, I think that entire conversation gets flipped around. So maybe what we do is we start making borders more strong in the physical world, but we make the NSA and Cyber Command's capabilities much more powerful, and we continue to push out through keystrokes, which frankly, less American lives get lost, right? It's more economical as well. There's some good arguments for that. When Harry Truman went to war without congressional approval, you're going to have to school me on some American history here.
So Truman went to war without congressional approval.
Okay, World War II. All right, thank you for that.
When we violated all the rules. Okay, Danielle's going to get me going on a tyrant here. So we'll get to that here in just a second. Let's not forget the strategic bombing campaign killed more than both atomic bombs combined during World War II. That is very, very true. Shouldn't the UN strengthen its cyber policy? Danielle, you've been listening to me for a very long time. Let me tell you something about the UN. I have a pair of socks that does more than the UN. They're old. My socks are old and they're ripped, and I haven't worn them in years. And they just occupy space, but they're sentimental, so I keep them. That's the UN.
All right, so I'm gonna strengthen Danielle's position here, because I agree that they are as useful as your pair of old socks that you have some sentimental value to, but they are worth repairing, these socks, right? It's worth patching up the holes. They are good socks. They might in fact be the only socks you can have. So the idea behind the UN is brilliant, right? The idea behind the EU, right? The European Union is brilliant. It's a brilliant idea. It's not working. We can see this. We saw it with Brexit. We see it with Greece and Italy and Spain tipping on bankruptcy a few years ago. So I get that it's a difficult road. I think it's worth attaining. And if you think about it from the perspective that France and England had a 100-year war, and this is not that long ago, a few hundred years ago, 100 years. That's like 3 generations of people constantly hating the French or hating the British. There is, I would say, almost zero chance of European countries going to war today. And David Koch, I think the late David Koch, I can't remember which brother passed away, had a great quote: "When goods and services cross borders, soldiers don't have to." It's an interesting philosophy. So I love the idea of the UN. I love the idea of the EU. Yeah, it might not be working. There's a lot of hypocrisy, and oh my goodness, if we could get rid of some of the leadership there, there's corruption in the UN. It serves against, oftentimes, American interests. I detest that. Right, that is an amazing amount to test. So keep pushing.
So let me put this to rest, okay? Because I disagree with you here, and I think this is the best part of the show. All right, and I'll tell you why. The UN has zero power to enforce anything. Everything they do can or cannot be adopted by different nations. And David Vaughan talked about this, I think 3 or 4 shows back, when we talked a little bit about the UN and said they've written a bunch of charters that, a bunch of smaller countries were like, hey, sure, we'll sign on to this. And then the US, China, Russia, and the EU looked at this and said, we're not signing on to that. There's no way in the world we're signing on to that. And that just shows you how useless the UN really is. It's a pair of socks with a bunch of holes in it. It's nice, but it's ineffective. It's ineffective. It has zero effect.
Right. But we can make it effective then. That's the point of
We
fixing
can't.
it,
We
right?
can't. You know why you can't? Because anytime you make something like that so big and so international and so universal, you know, it's not going to work. The thing about this is this requires allegiances. This is almost like Survivor, right? It's literally you've got your allies and you've got your allegiances with your allies, and you establish ground rules, and you strike back anytime anyone violates those ground rules against your allies, your allegiances. Part of the UN Charter, right, is to defend nations so that no one incurs on them in a position of war. Yet, China has encouraged Hong Kong. Russia has taken on the Ukraine and Crimea. Now, mind you, Ukraine's not part of the UN, but nonetheless, they did nothing. The Russians, the UN did nothing when Syria chemically bombed their own citizens. Right. The UN is useless. Looking at the UN for cyber resolution is, to me, looking at this wall behind me and knocking your head through it. You're not going to get anywhere but bleed.
We'll definitely be hitting that one another week. Exactly. All right. Matt likes it. I think he likes what you're saying on that one.
You have a problem. This is Jonathan Arnold. You have a problem being on the winning side. There's a lot of borders on the internet than either of you are aware of. This is from David Vaughn, and Shady Dave always brings up
really?
this.
I would love to know more about that. That's awesome.
Yeah, Jonathan said, yeah, he did. Shlomo's going to donate $100 to our wounded warrior. Come on, guys. We got to get there. This is an awesome cause, and you get to see me wear these ugly shirts. This is just one. We have more milestones, and more milestones equals so much more.
Maybe a shirt with you and N written on it.
Where are most of the tier 1 ISPs headquartered? I don't know, David. You're going to have to answer that one, buddy. I don't know. The UN's become too political. Yes, it's political with nothing. EU came up with GDPR. US is way behind. EU came with GDPR, and GDPR is a pretty decent bill, although it's really a power grab. It's a money grab by really bad governance.
I like to say if the Europeans could innovate, there'd be no GDPR.
Right. The number one, the U.S. is not way behind. The U.S. has a bunch of privacy bills that are being passed, but the federal privacy bill is on the floor as we speak. Hopefully, if our elected officials, Daniela, can actually do their damn jobs and pass laws and not make every single thing about party or politics, then we should have a federal data privacy bill enacted, I believe, in January of next year. Shlomo says the UN is worthless. They have become a senseless organization. NATO has zero power. There are no rules. Miguel says something here. There's no rules of engagements in cyberspace. That is also very, very true. That is the bingo. The bingo's from David Vaughn. The very true is from the awesome Jonathan Arnold. Shlomo backs my whole thing that the UN is unfixable.
What a shame. I will say that then, what a shame if it's not, because what a brilliant idea. And if we just can't pull it together, what a shame.
Well, we can't put it together because you can't have a body that has 120 democratic countries and 90 countries that are non-democratic, right? Like Venezuela. And you put Venezuela on the Human Rights Council. I get that where people are eating dogs. And you put Saudi Arabia, even though they're an ally, when they hang people still in the public square to this very day. Yeah. Or Iran, which throws gay folks off of the roofs of building and hangs them in the town square. Or China, that now is running the largest concentration camps this world has ever seen on a day like today. Today is the International Holocaust Remembrance Day in Israel. So let's talk about that for a little bit. You know why the UN's unfixable? It's because of all those things. The UN is unfixable because when you allow tyrants to sit at the same table with countries that have not a perfect system, but a better system than tyrants.
Yeah, that's interesting. One of the books behind me right here is Ayn Rand. I'm a big Ayn Rand fan. I read Atlas Shrugged when I was 26 years old, changed my life. It was the book that changed my life. And she talks in that book, hypothetically, it's a fiction, of course, about starting a whole new thing, a whole new country, which is what America certainly was and still is. But yeah, you know, that you hear this kind of conversation makes me want to just go, okay, let's go John Galt, let's go Ayn Rand, and start Galt's Gulch and start all over again.
So there's no rules of engagement in cyber, and that is absolutely true. You're also seeing the uptick of technology. So imagine when quantum and AI become really kind of common things that are able to be used, like no different than going to WordPress and building a website in 3 hours and putting it live, right? Like imagine when those tools become available at all of that. Leah brings up a good point. She goes, look at Amdocs. What do you mean, Leah? Do you mind expanding just a little bit? Because I think that's a great comment, but I want to make sure that you and I are vibing on the same thing you're talking about, because there are a lot of different aspects to this that are.
Well, and we spoke about rules of engagement last week in a certain fashion, didn't we? We were talking about, so your hypothesis, this was really good. You know, we have a Geneva Convention. Is it possible to put together some kind of convention that would say, yes, we don't cyber strike the weak, i.e. a hospital? Now, the trouble with that, even if nation states were going to agree to something and try bringing everybody to agree on it, so that's a rough case, cybercrime syndicates won't obey it, will they? You know, so they'll still go after those weak targets. So how do you get a rules of engagement document put together for cyber? Change your life.
Yeah. So David Vaughn's got a book for you.
I don't know what that is, man. So there's a smiley face, and James is going to mock me. Go for it, buddy. What is that?
So hang on. I want to get to Leah's comment real quick. We'll get to David here. But Amdocs is the largest holder of ISP data because they do all the billing for all major ISPs.
Wait, what's Amdocs, James?
Amdocs is a billing software that's used by like Verizon, AT&T, T-Mobile, Deutsche Telekom, Vodafone.
Okay. So sorry. So then, what's the put the two comments together then for me? I'm not quite following the.
So when we talk about how David Vaughn brought up a little bit ago, the idea of look at where all the ISPs sit.
Okay.
Right, like where are the most tier one ISPs headquartered?
Okay.
Right, and so to answer to that,
my house, right?
Leah points off to Amdocs because Amdocs is the largest holder of ISP data except for Verizon. So ISP data, you're talking about internet service providers and telecom. Well, we think of these companies and we go, well, they're all decentralized. Yeah, but they all use one billing system. And that billing system comes from one company, and that one company is Amdocs. And they have the ultimate monopoly. So Amdocs hosts the data. So you can have an AT&T, a Verizon, and a T-Mobile, and Amdocs has got all your data because they're billing you. They're billing you. The bill just has a different logo on it, but it's their software.
But the point being is specific to nation state warfare and rules of engagement for cyber. The point being what?
The point being is that if we look at this from a perspective of where all the data sits and how all the data is being acquired, there are companies that have this data that if tomorrow Amdocs was to fall victim to a breach, chances are the kind of information that would come out of there would destroy lives, families, and careers.
Right. Massive vulnerability. Yes.
So David Vaughn brings up retaliatory attacks of any kind must be commensurates. What do you mean, David?
Well, if somebody cyber strikes us, we would have a commensurate and equal and opposite cyber strike against them, I think is what he means there. Yeah. Verizon, yes, essentially Sprint. Right. But so back to how would we put together some kind of rules of engagement in the cyber world? Because even if we got nations to agree, criminals would not. And a lot of these
if you get nations to agree, so sorry to cut you off, I apologize, but if you get nations to agree, then the prosecution of cyber criminals becomes much easier because all these nations would be signed on to a single treaty.
Yeah. So if you are housing, when we went to go for Osama bin Laden being housed in Afghanistan, it's like, hey, Taliban, hey, Afghanistan, we're coming, right? So that's what we're saying there.
Right. Yeah. So we talk about proportional response. That's very interesting. I don't know what proportional response is, right? What's proportional to 9/11? Or what's proportional to the Boston bombing? What's proportional to what happened at the Capitol just last week, where we lost an officer in an accident, or the Boulder shooting that you don't hear about anymore, but that was done by an ISIS sympathizer who they say had mental illness, but nonetheless was, a functioning human in society up until he had that mental illness of going into the Jewish King Soopers in Boulder, Colorado, and shooting it up a few days before Passover, right?
But you see, that's an interesting, you said, what's proportionate to 9/11 and then the Boston bombing? Well, Boston bombing was two individuals with an ideology, certainly. So, yeah, are we
But do you go to war with that ideology? See, that's
Sorry?
the thing. So that ideology is the threat.
Right. So does it, that's where I'm going with that. 9/11, much easier to have, okay, it's these guys, let's go. With the Boston bombing, well, it's these two guys. Now, where did they get their ideology, and what's proportionate to the group that gave them the ideology, that fed them the ideology? Right. Now, that's very gray, right? 9/11 was clearly an act of war.
9/11 was designed to be an act of war.
Was the Boston bombing?
But the Boston bombing was designed to also be an act of war, because if you actually read what they both said.
But this is just two clown terrorists, right? They can't declare war, whereas Al Qaeda could.
Well, when ISIS takes responsibility for something, is that not a declaration of war?
Yeah. Well, did ISIS take responsibility for? Well, yeah, but you see, those two guys, this is beautiful because it's very great. Those two guys with the Boston bombing were not ISIS. They were sympathizers. They were indoctrinated. And ISIS said, yay, but it wasn't them that did it, whereas Al Qaeda did 9/11.
John Bailey has something great here about proportional. If someone wants to hit my wife with his fist, a proportional response might be to break both of his arms and both of his legs to prevent him from doing it again, and encouraging him and others not to do it. Kind of agree with John on that one.
Well, and I think the invasion of Afghanistan was that proportional response. It was like, you poke the bear, you're going to get crushed. Yeah, it wasn't just take out a couple of buildings. Right?
So something very interesting, though. David says here, both were acts of terror, not a state declaring war. The idea of a state's declaring war doesn't exist anymore, right? When Russia took over Ukraine, they didn't declare war, and Ukraine didn't declare war. They just said they called it a conflict, right? China took over Hong Kong almost by manipulating the rules so that they can take over Hong Kong. The idea that we're waiting for someone to say, it's like I'm waiting for that Michael Scott moment from The Office, where he walks outside after he realizes it's broken, he can't get an advance on his paycheck. And you remember that scene where he walks out and he goes, I declare bankruptcy.
Yes.
Right? So we're almost sitting there and saying the rules that were written back when gentlemen fought a fight.
Right.
Still exists today when there's no gentleman fighting the fight.
Right. So I think what we need then is we need to make our own declaration to say, hey, so the president needs to stand up, the administration, the people, and say, this is you do this, and this is the consequence. So that everybody knows moving forward, you attack our hospitals, you steal our intellectual property. This is the consequence for you. Does a document like that exist?
I believe so. Yeah.
What does it say?
Definitely exists. David says there's a major difference between a conflict and a war. That's true, but in the last 20 years, what was the last war we were in, or where two nations declared war? Armenia and Azerbaijan were going at it now for what? 4, 5 months, 6 months? How long were they going at it for? Azerbaijan and Armenia. That was also considered a conflict, even though both nations immense troops at the border. They were fighting what seemed to be a legitimate war. So where did we draw the line there? Right? So I don't know that there are no more wars, because everything is happening in cyberspace, and it's all covert, and it's all being hidden behind a bunch of different masks. But when you unmask it all, when you just look at it, it's just one giant battle.
Yeah, I'm looking at a computerweekly.com article here from 8th of March of this year. US may conduct offensive cyber attacks against targets in Russia within weeks in retaliation for widespread SolarWinds Orion attack, even though the government's... Yeah, I don't know if that's a piece of paper, though. Yeah, okay. It's called Credibility Without It, No Deterrence. Yes. Well, I mean, look, I'm in the industry, and I don't clearly know whether there is a piece of paper that says, if you, nation state, does this to us, United States, we will respond in this manner. So
that exists in terms of traditional warfare. When the Russians fly a jet and it approaches Alaskan airspace, we put up our jets, we warn them, and we'll fire warning shots across the bow, across, at the plane. And in
cyber, is there such a document?
No, there is not, because there's never.
Yeah,
and it won't come. It won't come.
Why not? Surely it's easy enough to write. No. You attack our infrastructure. You steal our intellectual property from our corporations.
So hang on. David Vaughn says it exists. So this is why I love having David here.
Awesome.
Letters of marque. Let's
look that up. Okay, I'll go look that up.
So letters.
Okay, beautiful.
So the letters of marque, which is a license to fit on an armed vessel and use it to capture an enemy merchant ship, a ship carrying.
Private party. Yeah, that's what I'm reading too. I'm not seeing cyber there, David, my friend. U.S. Constitution refers to. Yeah, I'm not seeing cyber in my very quick Google search, but we'll certainly bring this topic up again, because look at that. There's a minute and a half left in the show. James, good Lord, man. I could go on for another 2 hours.
So the letter of marque authorizes private citizens to attack others, according to Jonathan Arnold.
Okay, that's very interesting.
This is very interesting. I mean, I'm learning more from people today than
yeah, me too. This is great. Thank you so much.
Yeah, you guys are unbelievable. We do have the best fans on the show. We definitely do. The IQ level here is unbelievably great. But the letter of marque is one thing. I mean, this would be very interesting. I know that next week you're not going to be with us because you're going off the grid.
That is correct. I'm off next week. I'll be back the week after. And we've got a couple of great potential guests lined up to co-host with James. So definitely stay tuned on that. I think, ladies and gentlemen, this has been fantastic. I will start to wrap. James will start to bring up the closing comments. We've got about 30 seconds or so left in the show. I'm really grateful for your donations. I think it's a lot of fun. While I'm away, I'm going to try and find the ugliest shirt I can possibly find for James. And but I've got some homework to do, and I think we might even do a part 2 to this conversation. So I would like to dig into that, figure out where there might be a list of clear retaliatory responses to nation states, or even those states that would house the cybercrime syndicates within them, so that we can have a little bit of a better prevention for these things.
So if the government signs the letter of marque, we can all be pirates. I love John Bailey. I love it. David Vaughn says, I can get with you guys. Brilliant.
Awesome.
JP3 through the 12. More cyber, less political, less politics. I agree, David. There's nothing that I'd love more to do than talk more cyber. Unfortunately, cyber and politics are today intertwined. Whether we like it or not, I think everything is intertwined with politics nowadays. We'll try to avoid it as much as possible, but this is the town square, and when something comes up, we talk about it. And we should be talking about this stuff because that's really important to be able to weigh in everything. When we talk about nation states, we want to talk diplomacy before we talk war, and that's politics, right? And that's the State Department, and that's the White House, and that's the Pentagon, and that's DOD, and that's DHS, and so.
Well, also, James, give a quick shout out to all your other shows, right? Those are the 100% cyber shows, right? That's the Cyber Hub podcast as well. I mean,
right, Cyber Hub podcast daily. It's purely cyber. CISO Talk, purely cyber. CISO Thursdays tomorrow at 1 p.m. Purely cyber. Tech Corner, purely cyber. On this show, we're going technology. We're going a little bit more. We don't mind dabbling in a little bit of politics because I feel like you can't win cyber without politics, right? So you guys talk about what can we do? Can we create this document? Congress can. We talked about this, I think, a few weeks ago, right? We talked about the idea of could Congress put together a deterrent document that essentially kind of binds a response. And guess what that requires? Politics. So,
well, David brings up a good point for us to give a definition here with the Tech Town Square, because James has got some great cyber shows. He's got the largest audience, I think, in the world, certainly in America, on cyber for his shows. With tech, it could be driverless cars. It could be drones. And so, we should branch out, I think, a little bit more, James, in technology issues. And of course, we just have a passion for geopolitical affairs as well. But David, thank you for that, because it helps us define this show. And this show is the Tech Town Square. So technology, bring it on.
Yeah, we'll talk tech. We'll talk more tech, more cyber, and we'll try to do less politics. But he said less politics, not no politics. So I got to respect him for that. We got to read it for what it is, right? Which is great. I think we spent only like 7 minutes talking about politics today, which is great. Miguel says it was fun, learned a lot. Thank you.
Yeah,
Miguel, Leah, thanks for refreshing my history knowledge. Corinne, donate and do good for the Warriors in the Wounded Warrior Project. Folks, you can 390. Once we hit 1,000 milestone numero uno, I will be donning that Paisley shirt right there behind me for the entire show on the Tech Town Square. So you don't want to miss it. I will make Eddie wear a black shirt. So it'll feel like it'll be like the Twilight Zone. Joint publication 312, not 3 through 12. Okay, thanks for the clarification. Everything is politics today. That's according to Coke and Delta. And our final comment is, by the way, of talking of a war. Iran brought in bases into Syria, and Israel has been bombing the bases, even though there was no shots exchanged. And that is also very true. Preemptive strikes. He wants you to wear a Unit 42 shirt. Here's the deal. We might get him to wear a Unit 42 shirt if we could get to our ultimate goal, right? I think if we get to $5,000, would you wear a Unit 42 shirt?
Of course I will. It's all for a great cause.
Yeah, great. So if we get to the $5,000 limit,
take pictures, we'll get it done. Don't worry.
We'll get a Unit 42 shirt on Eddie. Oh my God, that would be unbelievably amazing. Nir would have a shitstorm on that one. And the awesome John Dela Cruz, who, thanks to John spent his own money in getting me the shirt and shipped it to my house. So John, thank you so much, man. I really appreciate your kindness and to support this and supporting the Wounded Warrior Project is an unbelievable cause. So thank you so much for everyone. Have a great evening. Next week, again, we'll be back tomorrow. I'll be live 9 a.m. with our only cyber show, The Practitioner Brief. James McQuiggan, the guy who donated $200 tonight, is joining me tomorrow morning to wrap up this week. So you don't want to miss it. Be there as we wrap up this week, and we'll be on Clubhouse on Friday. If you're not on Clubhouse, let me know. He just won. David Vaughn, he just wanted your address.
You just got hacked.
You know what? John Dela Cruz is my brother in arms, man. Like you are, David. So I have no worries at all. David Vaughn will be there to harass us both, as usual. I love David Vaughn. Thank you so much, guys. Thanks so much for watching. Thank you so much for being part of the show. Have a great rest of the week. Go and get vaccinated. I got mine. Just saying. We want this thing over with. All right, folks. Take care.
Bye-bye. Thank you.